Welcome to the video on check and checkmate. Now that you've learned how to attack, defend, and capture pieces, it is now time to learn how that applies to the kings, as well as how to actually win a game of chess. In this video, you will learn about and define what the words check and checkmate mean. To begin with, the kings have a very important and special function on the board. It's important to know that a king will never be captured or removed from the chessboard during any point in the game. This actually is illegal. So kings, while they can capture other pieces, they cannot capture each other. There always has to be, at least a rank or file's worth of distance between them, one rank or one file. And when the king is attacked, it cannot be captured because this is an illegal move. Okay, so first let's define what is a check. A check is simply when the king is under attack by another piece. Looking at the board here, for example, we see white's rook on c5 attacking black's king on c8. Now, whenever a king is in check, something must be done about it. The player cannot simply ignore the check. There are three possible legal ways to defend against a check. One is moving the king to an unprotected and free square. Number two is to block the check by interposing another piece or a pawn. And the third way to defend is to actually take and capture the piece that is delivering check to the king. So let's take a look at several examples here, because there are going to be situations where you're going to have multiple options for how you or your opponent can defend against check. So out of the three, you might have all three possibilities or only one at a given time. Your goal for all of these examples coming up is to first identify the check, and then identify what the best possible way to defend against it is. So here we go. In this first example, the white rook on c5 is checking the black king on c8. Black obviously has no pieces remaining left on the board, so the only option is to move the king to a square that is not protected by that white rook on c5. So black's possible moves here are fourfold: d8, d7, b7, or b8. Notice that one of the options that black cannot move to is the c7 square, because that square is still in line with the rook on c5. In this next example, you'll see that the bishop on g3 is checking the white king on e1. Same situation here. White has no pieces left, so the only option is to move the king to a free square. So ask yourself, where are the possible squares the white king can move to in this position? The answers, once again, there are four possibilities: f1, e2, d2, or d1. f2 is not possible because, again, the bishop would still be protecting that square. So here we have a situation where the white queen on c7 is delivering check against the black king on b6. If we look at the possible escape squares for the black king, you'll notice that the black king cannot move anywhere because the white queen still protects all of those potential squares to escape. And of course, the king cannot move to a square already occupied by one of its own pieces, in this case, two pawns. However, remember that one of the three ways to defend against a check is to take and capture the piece delivering the check. So in this case, the black king simply takes the queen on c7, which is the only move in the position. What do you think you would do here? Identify the check. You will see that the white rook on h8 is checking the black king on e8. Here we have two options. The black king can move to one of the three free squares. Notice that f8 and d8 are not possible because those are still in line with the rook. However, you may have noticed that actually the best move is that the bishop here on f6 can actually capture the rook on h8 for free, which obviously would be a better idea. In this position, the black bishop is delivering check against white's king on a1. Pretty simple here. You'll realize that white should simply take on d4. What do you think you would do in this position? Identify the check. Black's queen is checking the white king on b1. White has the choice to move to any of these four free squares. However, remembering how pawns capture, you'll notice that the pawn on a3 can actually capture the queen on b4. Here we have a situation where the black bishop on f3 is delivering check against the king on h1. And here we only have one possible option, right? Because the white king can't move anywhere currently. There are two of his own pieces occupying escape squares, and the third possibility is already protected by the piece giving check. So the only option here for white is to take the piece delivering check, which is that bishop on f3. So now that we've seen examples of how to simply move the king and take the piece delivering check, here's the third one, where you can block a check. In this situation, the check is here, the queen on a4, attacking the king on a8. Black's king on a8 cannot move to any of the three possible escape squares. So the only way for black to defend in this position is to block the check by moving the bishop to a7, effectively shielding the king from attack. What do you think you guys would do here? Identifying the check, the white rook is on a3, delivering check against the black king on a6. Black has the choice to move to one of these three safe escape squares. However, you'll notice in this particular position, white is also simultaneously attacking the knight on b3. So if the king were to just move, white would simply take this piece next move and you would be losing a piece for nothing. See if you can find a way to simultaneously get out of check and save that attacked knight at the same time. Put two and two together, the best defense out of check in this position is knight to a5, blocking the check and saving the piece at the same time. What do you think you would do here? Pretty simple. The check is fairly obvious, as well as the only move that white has. Knight to g1, blocking the check. Okay, so we have shown many examples of what a check is, as well as how to defend against it, the three possible ways. All right, so here we have a situation where, of course, the white queen is delivering check against the black king, and the only possible move that black can make is the most obvious, simply king takes queen. Okay, so you learned all about checks. What about this word checkmate? Checkmate, meaning the king is dead. Okay? This is the difference between check and checkmate and how a game is actually won. A checkmate is a situation where a king is put into check, but none of those three ways to defend against a check work. The king has no safe squares to move, the check cannot be blocked, and the piece that is delivering the check cannot be taken. So check this out here, no pun intended. I'll be saying that a lot throughout this video. Okay? This is a checkmate, and white wins this game. Why? So let's go through all the criteria. The white queen is checking the black king on a8. Can the black king safely move anywhere? The answer is no. Okay, it can't go to b8, b7, or capture the queen on a7 because this king on b6 is supporting and defending that piece on a7. More to come on that later. Okay, obviously with a checkmate one square apart from each other, nothing can block it. And as I mentioned, the piece cannot be captured either. All right, because that would be an illegal move. Okay, so your goal with each of these next examples, just like we did with the check examples, is to try to determine the fastest and best way to checkmate in the position. To have a better understanding of how to achieve this, not only do you need to think about how to check the opponent, but you really need to focus on the potential escape squares that the king has. Because you need to achieve both in one move, right? You need to put the king in check, but simultaneously make sure that the king can't move anywhere. All right, so take a look at this first example. What do you think you would play here for white? Do you see a checkmate? The answer is queen to b5. All right, so the queen is delivering check against the king on a5. The king cannot move to any of the four potential escape squares because the queen still covers it. And lastly, the king cannot capture the queen on b5 because this pawn on c4 is supporting and protecting it. And this is an introduction to what is called a supported mate or an assisted mate. All right, so a very common way to checkmate is putting a queen directly next to the opponent's king, supported by another piece or a pawn. This is a very effective way to achieve checkmate, so we're going to see some examples now. Okay, see if you can find the fastest way to checkmate in this position. Again, walking through the steps of how to do this, the first thing to do is identify where or what is the only potential escape square or squares for the opposing king in the position. Looking at this position as the example, you will see that the only potential escape square for the black king in this position is here on a5. All of these other four squares are currently protected already by this white queen on b2. So your job is to find the move that puts the black king into check and simultaneously covers this a5 square without losing control on those other four. The answer, queen to b4, checkmate. Notice how the knight on c2 is doing the supporting in this case, and the checkmate is delivered one square directly next to the opposing king. Some of you might have guessed the move queen to a3, for example, which is totally expected. However, notice that while you're close to achieving checkmate in this position, the black king can actually escape to the b5 square and get away. What do you think you would do here? The answer, queen to b3, checkmate. Again, using the same pattern of the supported mate, right? Identifying a square right next to the king where the queen can land, supported by another piece, and making sure that all of the king's escape squares are covered. So you're probably getting the hang of that now, and this one should be pretty easy. Keep in mind that checkmates can be given by capturing pieces also. You don't have to checkmate the opposing king by simply making a move. In this position, queen takes b4 checkmate is perfectly allowed. So there are going to be situations where supported checkmates are not the only way to achieve the end result. Okay? There are going to be plenty of checkmates available to you just based on spatial recognition and identifying how to deliver a check and prevent the king from escaping at the same time. So you can use your opponent's pieces to your own advantage. Take this case for an example. Okay, you'll notice that these two pawns here on a7 and b7 are physically preventing the black king from escaping to these two squares, so the only square that you need to control and deliver check at the same time is this square on b8, the only legal move for the black king in this position. Put 2 and 2 together, and you also might have noticed there are two potential checkmates in this position. White can either play queen to c8, or, for the astute learner, queen to h8. Both deliver checkmate. Why? Because you're simply putting the king in check. It has no way to block or take the piece delivering check, and it has no moves. So the game is over and white wins. This next example, I'll even flip the board here to help you, is a fairly common and important checkmating pattern. This is called a smothered mate. And it's often delivered like this, with a king caught in the corner, surrounded by 3 of its own pieces, and the knight delivers checkmate like this. Okay? Here we have another example of a supported mate. See if you can find this one. Now, a supported mate doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be a queen, right? There are other pieces that can achieve the same result. In this position, you probably found rook to b8, checkmate. Again, the support here is coming from this bishop on c7, and the king has no moves. Okay, so another form of basic checkmate comes in the form of an assisted mate, where the assisting piece or pieces aren't directly protecting the piece delivering checkmate, and the checkmate occurs, on a square not directly next to the opposing king. What's important to note about an assisted checkmate is that the pieces help guard the escape squares for the opposing king. Okay, so same methodology here as far as how to identify the quickest way to checkmate. First things first is to identify what are the opposing king's escape squares. You'll notice that the only potential escape square for the king on h8 is this square here on g7, because the black pawn on h7 is obviously preventing the king from moving there, and the bishop on d5 is actually guarding an important escape square here on g8. So see if you can find the quickest way to checkmate in this position. There are actually two answers here once again. Either queen to f6, checkmate, or queen to d4, checkmate. Once again, just doing a simple scan, you'll notice that a check has been delivered. There is no piece black can use to block this check, and the black king has no escape squares. Some of you might have first thought about queen to d8 check, a very natural looking move, and you're close. However, remember, while this is a check, it's not checkmate because you have not guarded against the king from escaping to its only escape square. So it's very important when you're trying to execute these basic checkmates. Don't always look for the checks. Almost more importantly is identify how to funnel the king in and attack the escape squares. That will help guide your focus to finding the correct ways to deliver checkmate in these games. This next example is a very important one. This pattern is called the rook roller. And what you see in the rook roller, and again, you'll see in the next example too, a queen can be in play here too. When you have rooks working together that rake across entire ranks and files like they do, you can get a very powerful flow going, funneling the king with no pieces left on the board backwards to the edge of the board. Where one rook covers an entire rank for the king to escape, the other rook delivers check, thereby forcing the king back consistently rank by rank or file by file, depending on which way the board's going. Okay, so in this position, see if you can find the quickest way to checkmate. The answer, rook to h1. You can envision this pattern and this structure of the rooks kind of staggering each other, pushing the king down the board rank by rank. Whereas one rook covers the entire rank in front or behind of the king, the other rook is delivering the check, pushing it back further. Notice that rook to a1 is not the exact same thing in this case. See if you can figure out why. In this position, white can actually block the check with this bishop here on g4 and go back to d1. So that's why in this position, rook to h1 is the only correct solution, which is checkmate immediately for black. So I mentioned in the last example that one of those rollers, or one of those roller patterns, can be achieved by a queen as well. Remember, it has at least the same power as a rook for sure. So in this position, see if you can figure out the fastest way to checkmate for black. The answer, queen to h1 checkmate. Again, this same roller pattern where either a queen or a rook controls an entire file or rank where the king can escape, and meanwhile the other piece goes to the file or rank directly next to it, raking across it, and there's no escape for a lone king. Other possibilities you might have thought about are moves like queen to g4, queen to g2, stuff like this. While it's certainly close, notice how it's not the most accurate because white still has a potential escape square in both of these cases. Okay. All right. So almost done. Adding a little more complication here. Again, not every checkmate is going to be so easy with, not too many pieces on the board. As you get more and more advanced, you will have to kind of sort through the complications of more pieces being on the board. But again, this is just an introductory video to spotting some of these checkmating patterns. All right, so take a look at this position. See if you can find the checkmate here for white. The answer, queen takes c7 checkmate. This is a capture with a supported mate, right? So the bishop on h2 is supporting and protecting the queen on c7. The queen on c7 is delivering check to the black king and simultaneously protecting all three potential escape squares. So the game is over. Last but not certainly least, you will have situations like this with multiple pieces involved, where maybe the opposing king already has no squares to go to, thanks to the help and the assist of other pieces. So if you have a situation like this, for example, where two pieces are working together so that the king cannot escape at all, to find the way to deliver the fastest checkmate, oftentimes you won't want to move either of those pieces because you'll have to make a concession and let the king out. So as far as the thought process, you want to focus on, other pieces to hopefully be able to deliver a check since the king already can't move. So looking at this position, the correct answer, knight to g6 checkmate. Okay, so you're just delivering a check with the assist of multiple pieces helping, and the king has no escape squares. Notice that knight to f7 does not do the trick because you're actually cutting the connection of both of your assisting pieces. So now the black king actually has three possible choices of how to escape. Okay, so this was kind of your first introductory video into checks and checkmates. Please feel free to practice the other examples associated with these videos. And thank you for watching.